Let's talk about the new moon that is happening this week on July 5th. It's a new moon in Cancer, which normally would mean the moon is in her domicile and she is new, so she's not necessarily visible, but for purposes of folk magic and manifesting traditions, for lack of better term, many people will be thinking that this is a perfect time for manifesting. Typically and usually, and I was excited to say the same thing. However, upon closer inspection, there's more to this new moon than originally meets the eye. And I want to show it to you now so that you can make the most educated and supportive decision in whatever you decide to do energetically or just in action around this new moon happening this week. So here we can see in the Luna software that we are at our new moon on July 5th. It's around 7 p.m. Eastern time. We have the moon and the sun both at 14 degrees in Cancer and 23 minutes. Venus is nearby, so we have a benefic there. It is not yet evening, so it is during the day that we will be able to see this, which means Venus isn't the benefic of sect. That would be Jupiter, who is averse at this time. So we do have the witnessing of one benefic, and this would normally be like, okay, we have a really lovely new moon happening here. This is a great time for potentially growing in the nurturing of yourself, rest, self-care, and perhaps nurturing of relationships with Venus involved. But then we want to take a closer look. With these planets at the 14th degree, the very next aspect they will make is actually going to be a trine with Saturn. The moon will move forward to trine with Saturn, and it's very close. Saturn at 19 and 23 degrees will have that trine, and then right after, we actually have Mars at 19 and 30 degrees, which will be the aspect after that for the moon. So this is what the moon is moving towards after the perfection with the sun. So this gives us a little bit of context of this new moon is also driving us towards these aspects. And so we see that while one benefic witnesses this new moon by conjunction or at least co-presence, Venus is still under the beams of the sun, so that is something that we want to keep in consideration here. I know by looking at other charts that she is not in her own terms here or her own bounds, while Jupiter is not able to see what is going on here because Jupiter's right next door, so it's kind of like a blind spot for Jupiter. You can think of the signs on either side as sort of like the blind spot in your rear view when you're looking behind you in a car or when you're trying to check lanes on either side. So this is the blind spot. And likewise, opposite would be a similar blind spot situation. So if we think about that, that would be Sagittarius and Aquarius in this case. Saturn is trine because it is in the same element, and it is where the moon is headed next after the conversation with the sun and before the conversation with Mars, followed by Venus. So when we think about this, the people or the planets, the personalities who get the next word in this new moon are both malefics. Not only that, but we have a unique situation where this is occurring halfway between the eclipse cycles. So we had the eclipse back in April, we'll have more eclipses this fall, and we are now halfway between eclipse cycles. We can find that really easily simply by noticing that these squares here are between the sun and the moon and the north and south nodes, our little horseshoes that are going on here. These horseshoes indicate where the eclipses are occurring. So for the past year and a half or so, our eclipses have been occurring in Aries and Libra. Eventually, the nodes which move backwards will get back into Virgo and Pisces, and we will see that shift happening very soon, where the eclipses start happening on the Pisces Virgo axis. But for right now, you can see that the nodes are at 10. So the moon is separating from the nodes and headed toward the malefics. And we actually do have some ancient text to support or describe what this could mean in interpretation. While ancient astrologers did not go very in depth with how to interpret the nodes in Hellenistic astrology, or what is today coined as sort of Western astrology, the astrology that really focuses on a tropical zodiac. The Vedic astrology traditions, which focus more on a sidereal zodiac, had a lot more interpretive suggestions for the nodes. However, in the tradition that we are using and in the method that we are using here, we do not have an agreed upon interpretation for the nodes from the ancient astrologers of Hellenistic astrology. They kind of go back and forth on, are the nodes themselves simply malefic because they do show eclipses where the sun and the moon corrupt each other? Is the north node more benefic and an increase? Is the south node more malefic and a decrease? They really don't know. Each astrologer seems to have their own theory on this. However, what we do know is that they are moments of intensity that are frequently associated with fate in ancient astrology, particularly in Valens. So the anthology by Vettius Valens, which is the text that I'm going to refer to now, in book 5, Valens does talk about when a planet, specifically the sun and the moon, are conjunct. So right with the nodes, which if the sun and the moon were both with the nodes, then that would be an eclipse, or square. And that is what we have here. And in this case, this is called at the bendings of the node, when the sun or the moon are square to the nodes, these being specifically the lunar nodes. And so what we have here is that Valens says if one finds someone beginning some matter while the moon is passing through the ecliptic places. So knowing that when the moon is square with the nodes, the moon is actually as high or as low as she will get on the ecliptic. So she is going from kind of that, if you've ever seen that sort of infinity symbol of the moon in her phases, she is going and passing from the northern hemisphere of that to the southern. That's what's happening when she is at this bend of the nodes, which for the moon happens every month, but for the moon and the sun to be there at the same time, this is how we know we're halfway between eclipse seasons. So back to Valens. If someone finds someone beginning some matter while the moon is passing through the ecliptic places at the bendings, he can forecast that the matter will be incomplete, regretted, and subject to penalties. So, for everyone who's thinking about manifesting under this moon, just know that things beginning when the moon is at the bending of the nodes really don't have the best oomph behind them to go the way that you would hope they would, or go the way that your intentions are set for them. Valens continues that this has indications of the intensity or the danger will occur when the moon transits the same places, the ascending or descending node. So that is when the moon transits the nodes or when the moon is conjunct them, which we do not have just yet. That'll be in a couple weeks. And Valens also says, even if a benefic is able to do something, a malefic in conjunction or aspect will hinder the good. So we would look here and say, well, Venus is there, right? That should mitigate some of this. She's a benefic. She is lending her aid. But again, I go back to the fact that Venus is under the beams of the sun here still, so she's not really at her best. And we do have the witnessing by the malefics in both cases. And even though their aspects are considered more supportive, there is the debate over a malefic where Valens would say Saturn is always going to do Saturn things. So Saturn, being the greater malefic, is always going to press or put pressure or restrict, and the trine may make that easier for Saturn to do, rather than mitigating the intensity of it. Mars, in this case, is going to attack or create challenge or create some kind of adversity. And the sextile creates an aspect where Mars is able to access that. So with this in mind, I'm not saying doom and gloom. I'm just saying this is another case where I'd kind of treat it similarly to how I would an eclipse, where at this time, it's not really necessary to manifest something intentionally. We can instead witness what is going on around us. And so my suggestion, both for your astrology for the new moon and for understanding how we can work with the energy of this moon more magically, is to witness what is going on around you. It is a Cancerian new moon. Therefore, the Cancer themes of care, nurturing, mothering, instigating something within the community, and creating that sense of support system may still be very prominent, but it's something that is there already for you to access. It's something that is waiting for you to acknowledge it and witness it, rather than something that you need to necessarily create or begin to manifest. My advice would be pay attention to what is going on around you already and see what is there for you to take note of and for you to act upon. What resources are there that you may not have noticed before? So my affirmation is I witness and embrace the emotional waves of my life, knowing that again, with the moon comes a lot of emotion. So we want to make sure that we are allowing ourselves the grace of processing our feelings, whatever form they're coming in. Therefore, I witness and embrace the emotional waves of my life. And if you're looking for ways to really apply this, or what to do when you're not, when the best action is actually in action, I'm going to say, let's ask what kind of Cancerian rest, nurturing, or time with loved ones the universe is putting in front of you, and consider if you'd like to accept or pass on that invitation. So, with this in mind, I hope that this week brings a lot of gentle rest and a lot of wonderful and beautiful opportunities to you. Many people that you find are a good support system for you that maybe you didn't realize you were so supported before, and that you can witness all of these things around you and see them for what they are, this thing that is moving you forward in your life and setting you up for hopeful futures.